Howdy, everyone. My name is Lakeisha Ray. I am one of the managers for the ECI division here, and I will be announcing our Advancing Justice and Safety Collaborative Approaches to Transforming Our Community panel. Please welcome our moderator, Tanisha Manning, a Houston native, HBCU graduate, and dedicated advocate for civic engagement. As Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs at the Harris County DA's office and founder of Engaged Voters, she works to bridge government and community. With a passion for justice and empowerment, she is the perfect guide for today's session. Ms. Tanisha Manning.
Yeah, sure. I thought she was going to read everyone's bios, but no worries. She said, I got you. See this? We working together. Good morning.
Yes, we are working together. Got it, Barbie? Yep. And on your panel today, we have Ms. Barbie Brashear. She is a dedicated social worker and leader with over 30 years of experience in domestic violence, specializing in trauma-informed care, crisis intervention, and safety planning. She serves as the executive director of HCDVCC, leading efforts to enhance safety, support survivors, and hold perpetrators accountable. Barbie also continues to address homelessness and women's issues through community collaborations, teaching, and advocacy. Next, we have Dr. Elizabeth Gregory, and she directs the WGSS program and the Institute for Research on Women, Gender, and Sexuality at the University of Houston, where she is also professor of English. Her work at the IRWGS focuses on analysis of Houston Harris County gender and sexuality data from pre-existent and newly developed sources. And lastly, we have Mr. Xavier Perry. He is a justice and public policy expert with a background in criminal justice, emergency management, and government operations. He serves as the Justice and Safety Manager for the ARPA Portfolio Management Office and is a doctoral candidate in organizational leadership with a focus on conflict resolution. Passionate about reform and equity, Xavier has been actively involved in criminal and social justice nonprofits since 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your panel.
Thank you so much. I was like, wait. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope y'all are doing well this morning. We are going to dive into a lot of good stuff. When they first asked me to moderate, I said, you sure it's the right Tanisha Manning? Century said yes. I said, okay, because it was another lawyer. Her name is Tanisha Manning, too. I just don't practice. She said, no, it's you. So I said, okay, perfect. It's me. So this panel, I haven't met Xavier, but I did look him up. And I can say this is a panel full of experts. So I'm going to help guide the conversation along. This panel is going to explore how Harris County is addressing disparities in the legal system, but mostly advancing justice and safety for young children and families. And justice and safety looks different for children and families, especially our most vulnerable, right? And we always think of just the legal system, but justice looks different or expands beyond the legal system. I tell everyone I am a lawyer, but I don't practice law, but I advance justice in any room that I'm in. So I'm Tanisha Manning. You heard my bio. We're going to dive into it. I don't know. Let me look if it'll be an opportunity for Q&A, but they'll be around because we know we like to give monologues sometimes instead of questions. So they'll be around afterwards. But first, I want to ground the conversation in just what brought you all into this space and what keeps you in this space. So let's begin by understanding your personal and what brings you here. So the question is, what led you here and what keeps you committed?
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So I have experience as an investigative analyst and an intern in federal law enforcement agencies. I've also worked as a juvenile detention and probation officer. I've worked on federal emergency and special assistance grants. And then obviously I'm currently working as the Justice and Safety Manager for the ARPA PMO, which is really a combination of all the skills I learned through all my experiences in criminal justice and the grants that I worked on in my previous role. And so I always like to pick roles that allow me to make an impact on the community, and I definitely think that I'm able to do that here.
Well, I started out as a poetry professor, which led me directly to this work. Because I was working on women poets and questions of how women can be heard in the sphere of any sphere. And working then in WGSS, which is interdisciplinary discipline within the academy, I learned about a lot of other kinds of approaches and concerns around gender and the way they all feed each other. So I ended up writing a book about later motherhood. You know, one thing leads to another, because we realized that a number of us that our mothers had had their first child a lot later, or we had had our first child a lot later than our mothers had had. And that led me to interview a lot of women about why they were doing that. And of course, in the US, the average age of first birth over the past 40 or so years has risen from 21 to 27, or even higher. For college-educated women, it's 30. So just talking to people about why they did that, and just all the dynamics, essentially around women's expanded role in society. Because in the past 30 years, women have become significant presence in the civic life for the first time in history. So this has just occurred, and a lot of it has to do with fertility control. So you can see, ... that connects to early childhood, right? Dynamics of all these things. So anyway, one thing, as I said, leads to another, and learning about all the dynamics of the way fertility timing impacts the way both dads and moms can participate in the workforce, finish their educations, all these other things, has been the motivator for me. But then realizing that there were huge amounts of data that were not being collected because populations are precarious and they think that you could use it against them. Well, they're right sometimes. But on the other hand, you can't use it to figure out what the needs are unless you collect it. So that's why we started our institute, was to focus on what are the actual needs and how can we responsibly gather that data and make recommendations for how to provide the services that will allow families to thrive. So that's a long story.
Good morning, everyone. I was not even going to attempt to think this could fit in that chair, so forgive me for being a little lower here. So the question is, what led me to this work and what keeps me in this work? What led me to this work was in 1992, my husband and I moved to Texas. I grew up in Indiana. I'm a Hoosier. Any Hoosiers in the room? Woo-hoo! Yes, we're not happy about the basketball situation right now. Okay, just had to get that. But Purdue did lose, so I'm an IU graduate. So anyway, when I moved here, it was my first exposure to city life. And Houston, we fell in love with Houston. We wanted to be in Houston. We chose Houston. But I grew up in what I call a white bread cheese whiz kind of town. Midwest, very blue collar, farmers and factory workers. There was no diversity in my town at all. It was completely white until I got to high school, and then we had a family that moved in that looked different than everybody else, and everybody knew, and that poor family knew they looked different than everybody else. I think that's kind of where some of the social justice was born in me, is seeing that. So when we were in Houston, we were, He was a student, we were dirt poor, and I was looking for a job, and there was an ad in the newspaper for working at a domestic violence shelter. And I like to say the work found me. And I applied, I was hired, and it was the first job I'd had that I could not wait to go to every day. And as traumatic and horrific as some of the stories I was hearing every day were, being able to be just a small part of hope and healing in a mom and her kiddos' lives was everything. So that's what keeps me going as well. So that's what led me to the work. I also learned that by doing that work that I grew up in a home where there was violence. And I had normalized that. I thought that was all families. You know, I grew up in a home where my dad used physical and emotional violence against my mom. We never called it that. They're just fighting. That's just what families do, right? But no, that's not healthy, and it's harmful, and it does have devastating effects on families. So those are the things that led me here and keep me here.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Yes. So see, y'all in good hands. From juvenile probation, detention officer, from poetry to research, from lived experiences. So, and Dr. Gregory, you already started touching on this. Before we can really explore, we have to understand or know what the data is telling us. And the data is sometimes, a lot of times, inaccurate because, which we understand, people don't like to report. You know, they're already vulnerable and data has been weaponized. But from what we do have, and Dr. Gregory, you can start, and if Xavier and Barbie, if y'all want to chime in, you can. What does the data show us about families and children, early childhood and families, especially in Harris County? And some of the disparities.
Well, we know that there are big disparities across income. We know that currently there's a big issue, and I think people will be talking about immigration. So in Harris County, 42% of children have an immigrant parent. So we know that a lot of families are under a lot of different kinds of stress in this moment. For instance, we got some data just the other day about a decline in Spanish-speaking calls to centers, to shelters. So that's since the turn of the year. So it's not because violence is going down, it's because people are afraid to call. And that means families are affected. And when people are afraid to call, it actually has the opposite effect, right? It means people become more vulnerable because there's more stress in the family, which makes it more likely that violence will occur. But also because abusers know, when they know that somebody doesn't have recourse, then they take more advantage. So you can see sometimes results in the data that you don't have. When people are not calling, that tells you something too. And it's not children who are calling, clearly, or not calling, but you know that they're feeling the effect because when we talk about domestic violence shelter spots, and you know, they're, one of the things in the report that we put out 2 years ago now was just documenting how few shelter spots there were relative to the wider population here in Texas, which was 330 in Harris County for 4 million people in the region. And then you think about that in terms of, well, that's not 330 people a day, right? Because people stay for a while. And it's not 330 individuals. Those are people with children, right? So the average person coming into a shelter has 1.7 people in that family, right? So that's children who are going into shelters. And Barbie could probably talk more about that effect. But then there are a lot of children who are not going into shelters. So when you hear the news and you think about negative effects on the economy, you can see a direct line to domestic violence and harm to everybody in the family because the abuser also loses in that process and may feel a lot of regret for what's happening in that dynamic as well. So everybody loses.
I can absolutely add to some of the information we know from the domestic violence, gender-based violence world. The age range of those that are utilizing services at the highest percentage are 18 to 34-year-old women. And when you think about what's happening in the lives of 18 to 34-year-old women, what's happening? Yeah, their families, right? They're a lot of times are young moms and they're raising families. They're at highest risk for intimate partner violence. And so when you think about the shelters, 2/3 of the population of any emergency shelter for domestic violence across the United States is kiddos, 0 to 18. Mostly on that under 10 age, right? And then we also know what happens. I mean, you all are early childhood educators, specialists. You all are the experts. You know that critical time is 0 to 3, right? So in the home where 0 to 3 is present and violence is present and trauma is present, we know what's happening to the brain. We know so much more now than we used to. So those statistics are completely alarming. Also, in the Harris County region, we know that Black and African American women are at the highest risk for domestic violence homicide. And I give that a big pause because that is something we should not take lightly, and it must be something we do something about. And those are moms with kiddos as well. I cannot tell you how many cases on the adult violent death review team that we've reviewed this woman's death where she's left small kiddos on our earth who now don't have a mom. So those things are super important. And as Dr. Gregory said, we are seeing our Latina population not come out for services. They already didn't reach out for services, and now it's even more devastating. So, a lot of work to do, a lot of work to do. But beautiful, I don't want to stay all on the downside because the beautiful thing is seeing you all here in this room who care and so dearly want to support our young learners, our young people in this world, and that just, that's a beautiful thing.
And if I may add to that, Dr. Gregory's report is phenomenal. You guys should look it up because I actually have a lot of those statistics. Just going off of some of the things that they said, one of the biggest things in Dr. Gregory and her team's report was the lack of shelter capacity. And she mentioned, right, we have 330 shelter beds for about 4.7 million residents. When you compare us to a metro area like New York City, they have 3,500 beds for 8.4 million people. And so that's still not enough. And so when we're talking about these families being affected, there's a lot of phenomenal work being done in the county. Barbie and her team and a lot of our domestic violence providers, they're doing great work, but there's just not enough space, even for the things that are being reported, because we have such a high turnover rate. And I'd also like to mention the legal system. You know, the court backlog is one of the hottest topics in our county, right? The court backlog saw cases balloon above 19,000 cases without a disposition in the felony courts and 24,000 in the misdemeanor courts. 3,600 of those were involved in the Children's Assessment Center. You guys aren't familiar with the Children's Assessment Center work in the legal system. Those are youth who are reported as a victim or a witness to sexual assault. So when we think about our families being affected, we have to really work on emphasizing due process and getting to quick dispositions, because there's a ripple effect through the entire family when there's cases that cannot be disposed.
Well, the data is grounding to know that we only have 331 beds. To know that, did you say 3,400 cases with the CAC? 3,600. So knowing this, and how many are you familiar with any of this data? Okay, a room of experts. But there are a lot of hands that I didn't see raised. And so now when we are starting to realize, like, we have a problem, Houston, we have a problem, the next question becomes, data is one piece, action is the next piece. And so how do we use this data to inform our work? And so first I want to go to, and maybe, Xavier, maybe you can, because you work on the ARPA portfolio. Besides this early childhood convening, the 4th annual one, what is Harris County doing to address this data and these problems?
Yes, ma'am. So specifically, I'm really gonna focus on the ARPA funding. It's obviously my portfolio, so the data is very intimate to me, so I look at it every day. So since the onset of the ARPA funding, Harris County has invested over $65 million in the staffing and support for the partners that are involved in the core backlog system. And so that investment has led to a decrease in backlog cases. So as of last month, I haven't pulled the data just yet, there were 6,506 backlog cases in felony courts, so that's a dramatic drop, and then 6,481 misdemeanor cases in the backlog. That's down 70% relative to our peak, which was in January of 2022. And we've also seen a 54% decrease in the backlog cases with the Children's Assessment Center. They're now down to 1,982 cases.
Okay, progress. Okay, I was nervous there. Go ahead.
Well, I think the answer, in large part, on the one hand, you want to provide more services for victims, but on the other hand, you want to start thinking about causes, what's happening, and how can we address those. And one way to do it, it seems pretty straightforward, is through expanded access to affordable childcare that would allow more mothers to work, which would, so a lot of people stay in violence because they can't afford to leave. They can't guarantee that they'll be able to put a roof over their children's head, so they figure they can take it rather than put them at risk. But if they were making, so we all know, I mean, if anybody here has children, I'm guessing some people do, you know that the education system fails totally to provide an infrastructure that would allow mothers to work. Why does school get out at 2:30? I mean, that makes no sense. Why doesn't it start before people are 5 years old? Why are they out for 3 months in the summer? When the school building is open, they could be running a child care after program. They could be running summer programs in those same buildings. All somebody needs to do is step up and fund it, and then people say, oh, that's too expensive, but all those people, all those parents who would be enabled to work would be paying taxes. They would pay for it. And there are studies that demonstrate that that would happen. So it's not really the case that it's too expensive, it's just that people are stuck in the same pattern of doing it the way they did when they were farmers and people need to get home and bring in the crops. That is not the case here. And it would enable many positive interactions, not just for the parents who would be able to have a full-time job, they wouldn't have to step out all the time, and they not only would they be paying taxes, but they'd be earning more and they'd be spending more in the community. Everybody would benefit. All, the ripple effects of any addition to an economy is positive for everybody. So there are ways that building a care economy should be seen as an investment that will generate a much more fruitful economy overall. And it just hasn't been discussed in these terms, I don't think, where you present it as something, not as a loss, where, oh, your tax dollars are going to somebody else's children getting care, but instead you're investing in a growing economy. So it would also require a lot more teachers, right? So it would create a lot of opportunities for people, both in the childcare world and in the sort of after-school world and these other dynamics. But that in itself would be a motor. And I think one thing that hasn't really, another side of this discussion that hasn't really had a full discussion is understanding how monetizing care can be a really positive economic engine. And it would also make care work, if suddenly care work were paid at a decent rate, it would make it more attractive to men to do as well, right? Because, it's now sort of seen as women's work, and women do it well. But if it but partly it's women's work because it's not paid, and they're sort of stuck with it. But if you monetize parts of it and acknowledge that this is an important contribution to society, you could transform the way the economy works in a very positive ways for all actors, bring people out of the isolation of their homes so that they're more interacting with other people. It also would be a preventer for domestic violence because a lot of people are isolated and they just don't have recourse to helpers. So you could just create more of a community. But I think it's an opportunity to start a different conversation about how to invest in the way women participate in society and civic life, and that will also give students more resources.
Thank you. And Barbie, I know y'all are doing a lot of work in your area.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. That was fantastic. We need to write those things down and put them into legislation.
Good luck.
On the local front, COVID brought lots of devastation and lots of opportunity. And Xavier was really great about talking about the investment with ARPA, right? ARPA is a direct result of that. And domestic violence has definitely benefited from ARPA funding. The county, one of the first things that the county did is invest in a direct stimulus to victims of domestic violence. And so, we had the federal stimulus funds, but the county gave, and there was predominantly 90% of those funds went to women, 10% were men that were victims of domestic violence, $700 stimulus checks right away, right at the beginning of the CARES dollars, which was amazing. That's never happened before, that this money was directly allocated to those fleeing and needing to be safe. And then the county just continued to build on that work by then creating the domestic violence assistance funds. So $4.2 million was allocated specifically for flexible funding. And we had been working for a very long time. One of my colleagues in the room can tell you he was a champion for a flexible funding approach, which is getting dollars directly into the hands of survivors so that they can use that fund, that money, that tangible financial dollars to be safer, however they, excuse me, define safer needs to be for them, whether that's physical, emotional, mental health, whatever that looks like for them, right? So it could be fleeing to another state, it could be paying for childcare so that I can work, putting tires on my car so I can get to work, whatever that needs to look like, right? So that was an incredible investment into our county. It's paid for with ARPA funds. Because that was so successful, for the first time in history of the county, they created that as a standing item in the general operating fund. Your tax dollars, if you pay taxes in Harris County, you are supporting those that are fleeing domestic violence with flexible dollars now because the county allocated it as part of the general funds. That deserves a round of applause because that's unheard of. Super proud of that. And then the other thing that the county did is invest, as they're investing today in all of our early childhood, is in one of the team that you have that's presenting this created the Early Childhood Resiliency Fund directly for victims, kiddos who have witnessed or experienced or been exposed to violence, to have therapeutic interventions that help to restore learning, healing, and better outcomes for future for those kids. So that was a huge 5.3 over, actually with all end and told, it's $6.2 million worth of funding from the county that they've directly allocated to children exposed to intimate partner violence for 18 months. So those are great things and great investments. The other thing that I want to say that the county did from a justice standpoint and a legal standpoint is our new district attorney, Sean Tier, campaigned on intimate partner violence, domestic violence, family violence as part of his platform and said, I'll do something about it. In his first 30 days, he created the Domestic Violence Bureau within the DA's office. There has never been a bureau. We have lots of different bureaus within the DA's office. There has never been a domestic violence bureau that's aimed totally at addressing these issues. And I'll tell you, back in the day when I was a first brand new advocate and we had the DA's office, I'm gonna say a really awful word, but I'm gonna use it because this is what it was called. It was called the slap the slut division at the DA's office if somebody had to deal with domestic violence cases. So we've gone from that and evolved now to a full-blown division that's dedicated to justice and safety for intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and family violence in our community. That's a lot to be proud of.
I'm glad I work there. Go ahead, Xavier.
I also want to highlight a few other investments through ARPA that are directly impacting children. So Children's Assessment Center received $1.5 million, and with that, they've trained over 61,000 youth countywide on violence, abuse, and prevention in our schools. And they're not only doing this in public schools, they're even incorporating private schools into this, and they're also engaging families to make sure that the youth understand that. And what that has done is allowed them to connect with youth who would not have disclosed that if they didn't know what it was. Because as Barbie mentioned earlier, if you see that all the time, you may think that's normal. But if you go to school and you see that the teachers and the principals and the counselors that you trust are telling you, these people coming in and administering this training, they care about you, you will now disclose that. And while it's awful they have to disclose that, that's definitely helped the CAC find some gaps in our community where we would never have known how many youth are really being abused. Additionally, we have the Youth Diversion Center. Not sure how many of you may be familiar with that, but that's a $7.6 million investment through the Harris Center and Resources for Children and Adults, which offers crisis, temporary respite, and mental health care for youth ages 13 to 17 to avoid unnecessary juvenile justice exposure. It also works to reconnect those youth to family and school systems. So we're doing a lot of things, we still have to do more.
Right. He's the data guy. I want to bring this home. How many of you heard of the Early Childhood Resiliency Fund? Okay, how many did not? Okay, how many heard of the CAC funding, the Children Assessment Center funding? How many did not? Okay, I could go down the list and y'all will probably not know, right? We are the experts in the room. We do this work and we are unaware. And so the next question is, how could we possibly touch and impact the family if we don't know? They surely don't know. One, they know the data because they live it, so they don't want to hear the numbers. And then they want to hear the solutions, and we don't even know. So the question becomes, and I get real passionate about this, not about y'all, but about this. How do we ensure that these programs reach the people who need it the most? And how do we ensure that they have a seat at the table or that their voices are centered in this work? This is lovely. And ARPA funding ends next year in December 2026. So we have a whole nother question there. But are the funds even going to be expended if they have not touched them? So my lovely experts, how do we ensure that these programs reach many of the individuals who need it and even reach those who can share it? And are we centering their voices? Because now the question becomes, are we even centering their voices if they don't even know about it? I don't know if that was on the document that I gave you.
I'm happy to jump in.
None of them want to
I'm happy to jump in. I like to think about raising awareness as starting with me, right? Often you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you need until you need it. So unless you're experiencing a crisis and in need of something, then your world just carries on and you're surviving it, right? You're just doing what you gotta do to get up every morning, get kids ready, off to school, down some coffee and get to work, whatever that looks like, right? And it's not until you need it that you begin to reach outside yourself. So I think we all, individuals within our community, are the best ambassadors for causes. right? So when you think about who did you listen to whenever there was a problem, and you went to somebody, who do you listen to? Who do you really take the advice from? Somebody you know first, somebody you trust, somebody you have relationship with. This is where relationships, I think, are the key to everything. I know I have influence in my circles of relationship. People that we have mutual trust, I can talk to, I can share my opinions, my thoughts, and my information. And I listen to them when they give me information, right? More than I'll listen to somebody that I don't know. So I think the key to me is starting with ourselves and educating ourselves. What are the things that I don't know that I need to know? And you, as early childhood educators working in that space, what are the things your kids need in order for that family to be happy, healthy, and safe? And do you know what the resources, what the information is in our community to help support happy, healthy, safe, right? Inform myself so that I can inform others. And then I become an ambassador. It's like you throw a pebble in the water and what happens? It ripples and ripples and ripples, and we don't see all the ripples. If I share my information with someone and they share it with someone else and someone else and someone else, right? Then we hopefully fill the world with more positive.
And you can put the information in places where people go.
Absolutely.
So you can show teachers resource, share that so that teachers can share that. You can put that. I was speaking to a survivor a while back who was complaining that there wasn't a handout in the DA's office explaining what they needed to do, what the steps were. There could be a handout. Yeah. So that people could anticipate, like, okay, I'm doing this, and then there are 16 other steps that I have to do. How do I frame myself around that? So it can't all be websites and things that people don't know about. It has to be where people are so that information is available on the site. And then just trying to remind people who have the information that they could share it, just tell people, because that's key. In terms of listening to people, I mean, we do various surveys, talk to people, invite them to do open-ended. One of my colleagues does interviews with people in shelters every day, and that's a lot to absorb, but it's important to hear the voices and hear the concerns, and then share those. So those are mechanisms for hearing what services people, working with community partners to get in touch with people about the services that they are getting, but also finding ways to hear from people, which is harder, who are not getting services, who are the even more underserved, and how to hear those voices.
Can I add one more thing? Because I think the other thing is that you mentioned, Tanisha, which is so important, is people not having a seat at the table. And sometimes we have to just throw out the old tables and create new. And that's what doesn't happen enough. We think the tables that we have are appropriate and fit everyone, and they do not. And sometimes we need to start from scratch. And that takes really listening to our community, our communities of color, our communities where there's high vulnerabilities. Yeah, I think that's important.
Xavier, don't even look at me. Okay. Where are we on time? I'm looking around. Are we good? One more question? Because I'll talk. Gotcha. Okay. So I'll do one question because it'll take some responses. But make sure y'all Google Harris County Early Childhood Initiatives, and it'll just take you to all of them. But let me not lose my page. 1 second. Okay. So before we open it up, I want to ask. I have a couple, but I'll ask with this. The people in this room do this work in some capacity. But now, after hearing you all, they're probably like, okay, where do we even begin? Where do we start? What tips or advice, I know Dr. Gregory, you touched on some earlier, do you have for these individuals in the room to address disparities or things in the legal system or in the county to do this work? And it could start by coming to visit y'all. You know.
Well, my tip is, I just want to listen to you. So it goes the other way. I don't have a tip on what people are doing, because you're already doing the most important work with the populations that you encounter every day of small children and their families, and giving them a resource, and that's the key, you know. And just finding ways to expand that resource, I think, and to find ways to support you is the ongoing effort, because we understand that in our society, the most important work, in order to get it done, they've set it up so that it's unpaid, and people are made vulnerable for doing it and have no status in society, but it's the most important work. You know, it's reversed. Just having more of a voice and speaking up for the importance of the communities that you represent and that you work with when you have that opportunity. But just, I don't know if that speaks to your question.
It does.
It's not really a tip, but
It's guidance, and it's good.
You want to go? You want me to go? I can go. I think thinking in terms of a tip or advice, as a social worker, I'm trained not to give advice, but I think one thing I would offer is never underestimate the power or the value that you have in the lives of a kiddo. And, you know, I think about, I love that this is called the Early Childhood Resiliency Fund. You know, as early childhood specialists, you know children are resilient. You know that, right? And you believe in that, and you build on that, and you pour into that every day. And we know that when kiddos suffer from a trauma, that's a setback, and there's negative results and outcomes from that. But they're resilient, and it means when we pour more into them, they recover, and they can come out on the other side. And I'll leave you with this story that just really, it's been a guiding story for me for many years that I've been in this work. But I was working, when I was doing direct services, I was working in a permanent supportive housing program for victims of domestic violence. And this was a 30-unit apartment complex where moms live with their kiddos. There was a child care on site. Beautiful program. And we had a woman who had come in that had suffered extreme trauma, and she was, of course, fleeing from her safety. And she had two little ones. She had an infant, and then she had a toddler, a little boy, actually, who was preschool, right? 3 years old, preschool. So he had turned 4 while he was in the program. And she was having visits, home visits from someone that would come meet with her regularly. And this little guy, and I was supervising the child care program at the time, this little guy would come into child care every morning with a bow tie on. Every morning with a bow tie on. And one morning I just had to stop and ask him, come on, little guy, tell me what's going on here. This bow tie is gorgeous and I love it. You wear it every day. And so he said, well, I have to wear this bow tie because the man that comes to see my mom, that's helped my mom, and now we're safe, he has a bow tie, and I'm going to be just like him one day. He was talking about the family violence investigator that was helping his mom with his mom's case, right? This investigator had no idea that was happening. He had no idea that he was having this impact, this great of an influence in this kiddo's life. This kiddo will never forget that investigator, right? That's the influence we all have when we're engaged in healthy, loving, supportive relationships with kids. So there it is.
We're ready for your questions.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Xavier, and then we'll do.
I was just gonna add, sustainability and intersectionality are very important in this space. I think it's important for us to make sure we're amplifying the community voice. And we also need to think about when we're doing all these initiatives, these pilot programs, these startups, are we just funding an outcome or are we engineering social change? Because a lot of times we start these programs and then the funding is gone after a year and the program never comes back. So we really have to start thinking with the long-term vision and understand that early childhood is not just childcare and education, but it's housing, economic development, healthcare, and the justice system.
Go Xavier.
Okay, friends, we're gonna open it up. Now, friends, give me a question or I'm gonna stand up. And y'all know when I stand up, that's gonna mean thank you with a smile. But they didn't even tap into half of the things that they can speak to. So if you have a question, please, someone has a mic. Oh, there are many.
Okay, we'll start here.
I guess my question really comes around this whole,
Tell us who you are.
oh, I'm Mary Jane Williams. I'm with Family to Family Network. We help families that have kids with disabilities. My question centers around the shelters. We don't have enough beds. What is Harris County doing in relation to that? Because we see that as a big problem with our some of our families that we're dealing with, just trying to find them someplace to go. And so that's what I'd love to know what Harris, because families with young kiddos really need someplace safe.
Well, they are increasing. So Hawk is adding 140 beds. So that'll take it to 470. And the bridge is also going to be adding, or is that not happening?
Fort Bend County.
Fort Bend County, sorry, will be also, so that's not in Harris County, but nearby.
50% of who they serve.
So, okay.
50% of who they serve is coming from Harris County. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is that, there is increase occurring, but one of the dynamics that has occurred over time is people realize that in order to serve people, they need to have them stay longer in the shelter so that they can get services and be, positioned so that they can access a better, they don't just leave and have to go back. So that also sort of balances out adding spots, is that then fewer spots are available because you're serving people more fully.
Well, and I also look at that where they're located, because we've got a big swath of Harris County that has no transportation, and then how do they get to even these shelters?
Yeah, it's a resource desert in a lot of pockets of our community, right? It's impossible. So Xavier, to me, it's the Domestic Violence Assistance Fund. That's what this is created for, is to help fill that gap. Flexible funds can be used for hotel stays, and we are using it for hotel stays. So if you go to the HCDVCC website, it will tell you the 19 partners that are receiving domestic violence assistance funds. Any of those agencies can assist with emergency transportation, food, and access to a hotel stay when the shelters are full. There will never be enough shelter beds. We will always have a turn-away rate. We can reduce it, but we will always have it. So those answers have to be even bigger than just emergency shelter. We have to create more affordable housing for families. We have to ensure that they know how the pathways to those housing, to get to those housing programs. And then we also have to improve economic, financial stability for young families. So all those things have to work together.
And then I also like to add, Commissioner's Court approved last year the Domestic Violence System Support Program, which is another $4 million initiative. Basically, the goal is going to be working with all of the partners to mitigate service duplicity, because what we've learned through gathering data from the people that are receiving services, like you said, there are deserts, there are 19, those are the 19 partners that we've been working with. There's probably partners we don't know about. But what a lot of the recipients are saying is, if I get rejected for a service here, I get rejected for a service there, and trying to work through the system to figure out which one of our partners is more suited to service this capacity and which partners are more suited to serve in that capacity, so we can make sure we have a more coordinated model of domestic violence assistance. So that's another project that has just started, and so you guys should be seeing the benefits of that really soon. But that's something that's going to really take a deep dive into what our partners are providing and if the types of services should be changed and where the changes could occur.
Thank you all for being on this panel. My concern...
Tell us who you are.
Oh, I'm Judy Blake. I'm also with Family to Family Network. And I'm very concerned about the lack of volunteer lawyer agencies. I love HVLA, Lone Star Legal Aid, but there's usually long waits. I have families that have kids with disabilities and divorce cases, and nobody wants to get involved and nobody wants to help. So I'll be definitely reaching out to you, Barbie, after this
Please do.
meeting. But is there something that is being done where there are more legal services for our families? And I'm very concerned when those ARPA funds run out, as I'm sure y'all are. That just terrifies me.
It terrifies us as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're terrified, and we don't get ARPA funds, and we're terrified about
Yep.
grants.
So we were already under-resourced before ARPA, right? And there weren't enough resources. And I'll tell you, the two highest demands and needs that survivors will say are housing and legal services. Always legal services, right? I can't tell you that there's good news in store because of a current administration and approach to social services and funding in the way that we're experiencing. I think we're trying to stay above water right now, and I don't know what the answer is. However, I do know that the domestic violence organizations are so incredibly crafty about trying to bring on their own base of volunteer lawyers. So they're recruiting constantly on the community to have legal clinics they bring in-house. We rely on our partners at the Domestic Violence Bureau, who's the biggest filer of protective orders in the county. People don't know that. It's a free service. And they're available, and they're getting ready to roll out programming out into the community, where they're going more out into the community to meet people where they are, which is fantastic. And then we have our partners like Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse, which is solely for providing civil legal remedies to families. So, you know, sometimes it's a matter of not knowing that there are other resources besides a couple. So please reach out to us.
Okay, I have to wrap us, but your questions were rooted in like, what can the county do? And one of the points that, forgive me, I didn't quite touch on is that it requires collaboration of many partners. The county, I know we have a lot of money, but we don't have a lot of money. And so it really, we have to rely on our legal resources, on others such as Hawk to, you know, create beds. It's really a three-pronged piece, from the data and the research experts to the county to nonprofits and grassroots organizations that are on the ground doing the work. So I'll be quiet because I'm not a panelist. I want to say thank you to each of you, but before we end with a round of applause for them, I cannot forget to mention we have a special lady in the house. It is our Harris County Fire Marshal. She's like, wait, don't. Chief Christensen, who is here. Y'all, she shows up time and time at many places. You will never believe, like, this is the fire marshal, but she shows up to many events that you'll never expect to see her in. So make sure you stop by to see her as well. But thank you to each of you. Now, let's give it up for our panel.